There are in fact two creation stories, and when you actually read those two creation stories, they actually contradict each other. So in Genesis chapter 1 verse 11 to 12, we see that trees are created. Then we see in verse 20 to 22 that the water brings forth the sea animals and the fowls of the air, so like the birds and different birds from that fly in the air. Then we see in verse 24 to 25 that the earth, so out of the ground, we see the cattle and creeping thing and beasts of the field are created, etc. And then ultimately the crescendo is 26 in Genesis chapter 1, where it talks about God creating the man in his own image. When we get to chapter 2, in verse 7, the first thing we see that's created here is the man, okay, which is the last thing created here. Then we see in verse 9 the trees are created, and then we see in verse 19 to 20 that the land animals and the fowls of the air are now brought forth from the ground. And this is obviously another problematic piece of text here, because the fowls in chapter 1 actually came from the water. So what's actually going on here? What I'm going to recommend you do if someone presents this to you, or if you're just reading through for yourself and you're wondering what's going on here, is there's a couple of key pieces of text here. Genesis 1 verse 1, so the beginning of the Bible, to chapter 2 verse 3 are the first 7 days. That's pretty much indisputable. If you just read the narrative from Genesis, the beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1 to 2 verse 3, you're going to see how at the end of chapter 1 we see it's the 6th day, and then in these first 3 verses we get into this chapter and it starts talking about this was the 7th day and the Lord rested from his work. The Lord wasn't sleeping or tired or anything like that. We've done a video about that and I'll put that in the description box below for you to watch after. But this is pretty much clear and concise. So once you know this piece of text going into chapter 2 is dealing with the first seven days of creation, then another key piece of text in Genesis 2 is actually really vital, and that's verse 4 to 5, because that says these are the generations of the heaven and the earth in the day that they were created. So basically, just to kind of simplify that for you, that's basically saying this is the history. So what happens after it talks about this? Well, we know this is everything before this covered the first 7 days of creation, and we know that man was created on day 6. This is what we like to classify, okay, from Genesis 1 verse 1 to chapter 2 verse 3 as the bird's eye view. This is the big overview, okay, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7. Next, what's significant is we need to get straight into the narrative, and the narrative starts with the man. This is why in verse 7 we see it talk about God created a man from the dust of the ground, etc. God created a man. We know that was day 6. And then what comes next? In verse 8, what does it say? God plants a garden. And where's that garden? That garden is in Eden. And once you know all of this stuff, okay, really from verse 4 to verse 8, everything lines up now. Because the narrative is shifted from a bird's eye view to the ground level view, and now we're focusing in right on the man. Why is that significant? Because God creates the man, which he did in day 6. Then what did he do next? He planted a garden in Eden. Then what did he do? He created some trees, and these trees, where were they created? In the garden. We're not talking about God creating these trees as he did in chapter 1, okay, in the earlier days. We're talking about planting these particular trees in the garden, tree of knowledge of good and evil, tree of life, and all these different trees, etc. Verse 10 to 14 talk about 4 different rivers. We see Pison, Gihon, Hiddekel, and the Euphrates, and we also talk about the land of Havilah, where there's gold, okay? But what does it say? These were rivers in the garden. We're not talking about the world altogether. We're talking about specifically in the garden. Because all these through 19 to 20, we see the land animals and the fowls, which were apparently supposed to be coming out of the sea, which come out of the ground here, but we know this is in the garden. But why is this significant? At day 6, as we can rightly see here, all of this stuff was created before, okay? The sun was created, all that stuff before. So what does God do? God basically shows Adam him creating things, okay? He shows Adam him creating animals and etc. And he brings them to Adam. Now, why is this vital? God knew thousands of years down the line, men and women will come and start saying that God didn't actually create the world. The world was created by some big bang and all this kind of stuff. But Adam was here to testify, to say, you know what, I saw God creating things. So no one could try and say God wasn't the creator, etc. The reason this is actually really insightful to get this ground level view is for a number of reasons, okay? One key reason is we get specific examples of God making very specific claims. One example, which is one I just mentioned, God actually took a rib from the side of a man. Why is that significant? Well, I recommend you watch this video right here, which specifically talks about why God actually took a rib from a man and how this has mind-boggling ramification. And obviously, don't forget to subscribe to the channel below if you haven't already. And obviously, if you're already subscribed to the channel, or if you want to continue to support us in different ways, you can use the links in the description box to continue to support us and help us make videos like this